Okay, so when I last left you in, I guess, week 6, Stephen F. Austin had been thrown in jail in Mexico for agitating for Texas to become a standalone state within Mexico. He'd written a letter that had gotten captured by Mexican spies, and he got in trouble. So Stephen F. Austin, it's around 1833, 1834. Stephen F. Austin is in jail. Um, in Texas, there is a lot of discontent among Anglos, but also among some Tejanos as well. Their allies, like the Seguin family and the Navarro family, which you'll learn about in the documentary. They're increasingly unhappy because the government in Mexico, the central government in Mexico, is starting to try to establish its control over Texas. And Texans were happy with the Federalist government in Saltillo. The Mexican Constitution of 1824 had given most of the power over Texas to the local state government, which was in Saltillo. They weren't happy that they were part of a huge state. They wanted to be a standalone state. They wanted to be a separate state of Mexican Texas, but they were happy with the federalist system that gave power to local governments. But what's happening by 1833 or so, certainly after the law of April 6th, 1830 is passed, and even after that, the central government in Mexico City is starting to take more power away from Saltillo, from the state government. So the centralists now are gaining more power in over Texas than are the Federalists. And when I say centralist, that's coded for Mexico City, and the Federalist, that's coded for Saltillo, the capital of Coahuila y Tejas. So when Anglos in Texas, when they look at the political situation in Mexico, they're unhappy because they're Federalists. They want power on the local level in Saltillo because they have a lot more say. They don't have any say in Mexico City. And as I've said in the previous podcast, but let me remind you, most of Mexico is very, very anti-slavery. You do have significant pro-slavery voices in Saltillo. You have nothing of the same kind in Mexico City. So that's another danger for the Anglo-Texans, all of whom are pro-slavery. The stronger Mexico City gets in Texas, the stronger the anti-slavery forces in Mexico get in Texas as well. And that's is always their priority. Their main priority is making sure that slavery exists and thrives in Texas. Why? Of course, because the Anglo settlers believed that in order to grow cotton, which was the most profitable thing that they could do, they needed slave labor. And but they happen to be in a country where the vast majority of Mexicans, except for those in the north, were anti-slavery. So this is kind of how slavery fits into the wider context of Mexican politics and Mexican society, slavery in Texas. Basically, Mexican Texas is part of a nation that, generally speaking, is anti-slavery. And in the heart of that is the central government in Mexico City. And the central government by the 1830s is gaining more power in Texas. Saltillo, the power of Saltillo is receding, and the power of Mexico City is advancing. So what you have in Mexico is a very disturbing situation from the point of view of the Texans. General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, he gains power in Mexico. He is a hero. He had fought bravely against the Spanish. You might remember that Santa Anna had been in San Antonio when Arredondo came up in 1813. Santa Anna had participated, we think anyway, in the massacre of civilians in San Antonio during the when Arredondo came up into San Antonio to suppress the revolt against Spain. And so Santa Anna had already gotten his hands bloody in Texas. But initially, Texans were happy when Santa Anna became elected president of Mexico because Santa Anna promised that he would be a Federalist. And hopefully you understand by now that that's a good thing for Texas because that means power is on the local level, especially Saltillo, where Texans have some say. They have almost no say in Mexico City. But Santa Anna, I think it's fair to say, is a fairly slippery character. He's really a challenging historical figure to try to understand. What he does is he's elected president of Mexico, and then he retires to his hacienda near Veracruz, and he lets his vice president take charge. His vice president comes in, does some unpopular things, especially in terms of the Mexico's government's the relationship with the Catholic Church, and then Santa Anna leads a revolt against his own vice president. That's kind of crazy. So just to repeat that again, Santa Anna is elected president as a Federalist. He kind of retires from the scene. He doesn't retire from the presidency. He goes to his hacienda. He knows some unpopular things are going to have to happen in Mexico City, and he doesn't want to have to deal with it. He makes his vice president deal with it, and then he overthrows his vice president and he assumes control over Mexico. So by 1835, a year before the Texas Revolution, Santa Anna is installed as the dictator of Mexico. He comes in and he declares himself a centralist. Okay, so this is a key thing for you to remember. When Santa Anna finally assumes power in 1835, he shed his Federalist skin and he declares himself a centralist, i.e., that he wants most of the power to be in Mexico City. Why? Because he controls the government in Mexico City. Well, this is very dangerous for Anglo-Texans because they know that Mexico City is anti-slavery, as is most of Mexico. So when Santa Anna takes power and declares himself a centralist, that he now favors the centralist, he now favors most of the power being in the center in Mexico City. This is a real problem for Anglo-Texans because they realize that the more power there is in Mexico City, the more trouble Mexico City will make for slavery in Texas. And so what you have is in Texas or in Mexico, you've got revolts all over Mexico. It's not just Texas that is going to revolt against Santa Anna, which they do in 1836, the Anglo-Texans and the Tejanos, their allies. Not only do they revolt against Santa Anna, but in Yucatan, there's a revolt against Santa Anna, the centralism. In Zacatecas, there's a revolt against Santa Anna. So Texas is part of a larger revolt against Santa Anna's dictatorship. But Texas is a special case, and really one of the key reasons, unlike the other states in Mexico that revolted against Santa Anna, Zacatecas and Yucatan, just to name two, Texas is right next door to the United States. And Texas is able to get supplies from the United States. It's able to get manpower from the United States as well. So Texas has a big advantage when it revolts against Santa Anna because of its location on the northeastern frontier of Mexico. It has an advantage that the other states in Mexico don't have. And this is going to play a significant role in the ability of the Texans to defeat Santa Anna and for Texas to become an independent nation. To be honest with you, though, the other thing that happens is Texas gets very lucky because when Santa Anna invades Texas in 1836, he just proves a completely inept general. Basically, what happens is Santa Anna fumbles Texas away There's no way that Mexico should have lost Texas, but Santa Anna proves such an inept general that that's what happens. So, okay, so Santa Anna is now the centralist dictator in Mexico City. He comes in, he abolishes the Constitution of 1824, which Texans liked, except for the fact that it created a state capital for them in faraway Saltillo, and it made Texas part of a larger state. And Texans wanted to be a standalone state within Mexico, a slave state. But they're horrified when Santa Anna comes in because he completely voids the Constitution of 1824. So what's happening is that the Federalist Constitution of 1824, which gave power to the local states such as Coahuila, Tejas, the local state capitals such as Saltillo, Santa Anna is basically centralizing all the power in Mexico in his hands. And this is not a good thing for the Texans in their view, because Mexico City is so anti-slavery. So that's a problem. And then Santa Anna abolishes the state legislatures, including the one in Saltillo. So Texans now have to deal one-on-one with Santa Anna. So they initially had been very happy when Santa Anna had taken charge in Mexico City because they thought he claimed to be a Federalist. But now suddenly, Santa Anna is now in 1835, just a year before the Texas Revolution. Santa Anna has taken power in Mexico City, declared himself a Federalist, abolished the Mexican Constitution of 1824, and now the Centralists are running Mexico. And that's bad for Anglo-Texans because Mexico City, the people within Mexico City, the power center in Mexico City, is very, very anti-slavery. And Texas, unlike Saltillo, has absolutely no voice in Mexico City to protect the institution of slavery. Now, of course, if you're a slave, this is a good thing. You're happy about this. And so often we talk about just how Anglo-Texans are thinking. Let's think, for instance, how slaves are perceiving this. They're thrilled that Santa Anna has taken power. They're thrilled that the dictator of Mexico is anti-slavery. But unfortunately, the slaves had very little power. And it's the Anglos that are running the show in Mexican Texas.